Alright, good morning, guys. So, what I want to talk about today is probably what I think is the coolest and, the best thing to ever come out of the Cold War. And that is a space race, okay? Because what's going to happen is the space race is central and vital to the Cold War, and yet we often want to de-link it from the Cold War. The fact is, this is going to happen as a result of all of the money being put into missiles. Again, you need a nuclear delivery system, but the people who are pioneering those missiles, specifically two men, Werner von Braun, a German who's going to work for the United States, and Sergei Korolev, who works for the Soviet Union, okay, what we're going to see is these two men had always wanted to explore space. They'd both gotten into rocketry in the 1920s and 1930s. They dreamed of being able to go to the stars. And the Cold War kind of hijacks what they're doing. Okay, we need it for, nuclear weapons. But then both can make the case of space exploration, and they do so in the sense that each side appeals that this is how we can beat the other superpower into, this is how we can beat them in the Cold War. The space race is going to be important because this is an avenue by which we can challenge the Soviet Union, and they can challenge us in a way that does not involve nuclear combat. Okay? Think about everything we've been talking about so far. This geopolitical game, divvying up the first and second, third world. Okay? A proxy war always has the chance to expand into a nuclear conflict. Any sort of rearmament or military action, even a political dispute or a coup, could spiral into nuclear war. But not this. Not the space race. This was simply who could be better. Okay, was communism or capitalism capable of putting a man, in theory, on the moon? And initially, this had nothing to do with moon. In fact, what we're going to talk about today is the shaping of that early space race, and then how it becomes a moon race. And the fact is, it becomes a moon race because we get our butts kicked. The fact is, the United States is woefully unprepared. Okay. What we're going to do is, both sides rely on those early German rockets, the V-2, okay? Because this, again, had gone to space in 1944, although it was what we would call a suborbital, it just up and then down. But we keep experimenting with their rockets. We develop newer missiles. Remember, what I had talked about with the R-7 Semyorka, the Atlas, building the first intercontinental ballistic missiles. But as we're doing, people wonder, can this be used for other stuff? And there's, again, military possibilities. I'm going to play part of the Pathé interview with the Mercury 7, but in the full interview, one of the questions that's asked is, are there military applications in space? And people were envisioning, well, what about space-based spy satellites? What about orbiting, stations with nuclear weapons? All this fantastic stuff that kind of is even beyond our reach now. But go back to that U-2 crisis of 1960. Go back to Francis Gary Powers getting shot down over the Soviet Union. Satellites provide an alternative. Something so high that if you could put a good camera in there, get the same resolution, you did not have to worry about violating international airspace. You didn't have to worry about violating a national airspace, I should say. And it really can't be shot down, not with 1950s technology. So what we're going to see is, early on with this space race, espionage is the main desire. Okay, can we put a satellite in orbit to detect, enemy nuclear positions? That's the whole point. In fact, early on, there's no central agencies for exploration. For the Soviet system, Sergei Korolev, who is known as the chief designer, there's not really a unified Soviet space program yet. He has to work under the direction of the Soviet Army. In the case of the United States, quite literally, you have the Air Force with its own space program, which that kind of makes sense. You have the Army with its space program, that makes a little less sense. And you have the Navy with its space program. So we're just jumping to Call of Duty Infinite Warfare here. I don't know why the Marines didn't have one. I guess they're just too combative. I don't know. I say that my uncle was a Marine. I love the guy. But early on, okay, this is not going to be, that effective. Okay, you're gonna have things like Patricia, the space monkey, from the 1950s, and the whole idea is these early launches, many of which were unsuccessful, would be, you almost wouldn't even be calling it space. It's space in the sense of what is it, Virgin X, and what is it, not Elon Musk's guys, but I guess it's Virgin Galactic now, Virgin X. But, the people that say, well, we're going to take you in the space plane. Okay, it's technically high enough to count as space, but not really what I think of where it's pitch black and, you can see stars and Marvin the Martian. It's not that kind of space. And we see that this is about all we can do. Okay, the fact is, many of these early rockets are very unreliable. Okay, if you look at this rocket here, okay, you can see this elaborate launch tower and all this, but the rocket is literally right here. That's the extent of the rocket. This is not a huge thing. Yes, I just said the rocket isn't huge. Do with that what you will. But what we're going to see is you got to trial and error. I mean, let's go back to Thomas Edison, who failed 41 times before he built the light bulb. He said, I didn't fail. I just found 41 ways to not build a light bulb. That's what we're doing. To give you a sense of how bad some of these early rockets can be, I'm going to play you one of the most hilarious failures ever. And let me see if I can... There we go. This is actually from 1961. Okay? This is Mercury Redstone. This is the rocket that will eventually make Alan Shepard the second man in space, though he doesn't achieve orbit. This is the first attempt at a test flight. Watch what happens. Okay, it releases, it starts to fire, the escape tower jettisons, and the parachute pops. The rocket malfunctioned, it lifts about 4 inches off the ground, comes back down, and that's it. That's in 1961. Imagine what it's like in 1951. Okay, this is, most of our rockets are going to fail. Okay, in fact, what is it? Sergei Korolev, his R-7, which will be the first intercontinental ballistic missile, has so many engines. Okay, because it's got to produce thrust to lift a big, heavy nuclear payload and take it 1,000, 2,000 miles away. If any one engine fails, the whole thing will blow up. And the first time they try to test this, it literally detonates several times before they finally get it right. So what makes them continue? Again, you don't need satellites. It would be great, but you don't need it. The fact is, there's also recognized propaganda value, and this is the big thing. Why haven't we gone to the moon since 1974? Okay, that's a valid question. In fact, that's why a lot of people say that we never went to the moon. Take this from this class. Remember, Cold War, giant pissing contest. If that's not on one of your exams, I'm going to be sad. It's all about propaganda. It's all about being able to say that capitalism is better than communism. And that's why we go to the moon. That's why we're going to spend billions of dollars building, the largest, most powerful device the world has ever seen. The Saturn V rocket, our moonship, okay, when it launches in Florida, it will trip off seismographs in California. That's how powerful it is. It literally weighs more than a World War II destroyer, and we shoot that into space. In the case of the Soviet Union, they're in one, which is a colossal pile of junk. When 2 of them blow up on the launch pad, they are the largest non-nuclear detonations in human history. Literally, they're so full of rocket fuel that when they blow up, it's almost a small nuclear weapon. It's as big as you can get without splitting atoms. Okay? So why do we do this? Because if the Soviet Union, in the words of Nikita Khrushchev, which goes back to what I told us, Living Under a Red Moon, he would boast after the first successful Soviet space launches that we're going to send men to the moon, we're going to send them with red buckets of paint, and we're going to paint the moon red so that Americans have to live under a red moon. And that scared the hell out of us. To quote Lyndon Johnson, then vice president, and kind of the head of, he wasn't the head of NASA, but he was the guy that NASA reported to, I will not go to sleep under a communist moon. Now here's my question. Does paint actually work in space? I legit have no idea. I just imagine, how do you get it to stick? And I don't think it's feasible. But it's the Cold War. We don't care about feasibility. Come on. No, we're all about fear. Okay? If we're afraid this is going to happen, we're going to do it. And so what we're going to see is two things. The Soviets are geared for results. Okay? The Soviets aren't going to televise everything. They're not going to televise their horrendous number of launches. What they're going to do is, Yuri Gagarin did great. Belka and Strelka got back. We're going to tell you about them. We're not going to tell you about the rocket failures. We're not going to tell you about... So to them, it might look like it's better. But we're about openness. We want to show that, hey, we're going to televise everything. Here's what we can do. Oh, that rocket exploded? Good thing we can afford another one, because yay, capitalism. But all the theoretical stuff craps out in 1957. The fact is, what's going to happen is this little metal ball about yay big with nothing but a ham radio inside that went beep, 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 beep. That's all it did. Will change the world in ways you probably don't even realize. What does this pick up on? Satellites. Okay? That's how it works. How some of you probably accessing the internet to watch this video. Satellites. All made possible 1957. So why? The Eisenhower administration pushes for scientists who would like to designate years as international geophysical years to study stuff. And he pushes 1957, do something with satellites. And they say, okay, well, we think there's going to be solar activity. So one of the things that we want to see happen is satellites. We want to be able to study the sun. Okay? If we can have orbiting scientific instruments, okay, we can for the first time begin exploring space. Now, the reason the Eisenhower does this is simple. Again, turn back the dial. Let's go back to Francis Gary Powers. Okay? If we launch a satellite, that can be seen as an escalation, especially if we're wanting to use it to spy on the Soviet Union. But if the Soviets launch a satellite, it has to cross nations without their permission. You know, what happens if Canada says, no, we don't want your satellite over our, barren wasteland? Well, you can't steer the thing around it, okay? So this would create de facto guarantee that satellites are fine, if not de jure. And the Soviets stepped up to the challenge. Sergei Korolev, this was his dream, and I wish I put a picture of him, but I'm an idiot, and I didn't. I swear, when we come back to the space race, we'll have stuff of chief designer. Glorious comrade. And so he steps up and he says, okay, well, I've perfected my R7 Semyorka. In fact, the R7, that first ICBM, is starting to become obsolete because you're starting to get some better rockets, as well as, you're slimming down the nuclear payloads so you don't need such a big one. And so, rip the nuclear bomb out of it, put a basketball in it, and send it to space. And this scares the hell out of the United States. So much that October 4, 1957, when this happens, okay, the whole reason the Soviets put a ham radio in it is so that people all over the world could tune in to listen in. Beep, 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 beep. It proves they did it. There is literally nothing in it. But that's not enough to placate Americans. So 2 days later, on October 6, CNN had to do a live broadcast, a live special report, which shows us a lot of what people thought, but also this is to try to calm their fears.
CBS Television presents a special report on Sputnik 1, the Soviet space satellite. Douglas Edwards reporting.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of 20th century life as the whir of your vacuum cleaner. It's a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today. One of the places where the progress of the satellite is being watched most closely is the Hayden Planetarium in New York. CBS News correspondent Richard C. Hottelet reports from there now.
Doug, we're in the great dome of the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and I have with me Dr. Kenneth Franklin, an astronomer on the planetarium staff. Dr. Franklin, can you tell us where the Sputnik is now and how it's moving?
Right now it's north of Auckland, New Zealand, and moving southeast. It
And
will
then when
be
your pencil
in
breaks
10
on live
minutes,
TV.
about
Oopsies.
1,500 miles north of Little America, and in about 24 minutes it will be over Santiago, Chile, and in about 50 minutes from now it will be over Spain.
Well, it looks as though it'll be missing the United States on this trip.
That's quite correct, it will.
But it does come over here periodically, doesn't it?
It comes over here at least twice a day and maybe more.
Getting back to this track, is it possible that it is transmitting a code, not just a beep signal for radio listening?
Yes, it's quite possible that it's transmitting a code, but we don't realize what the code is, of course.
The initial thrust to get it into the air.
Notice the two questions that the guy had to ask, okay? Is it pardon me. So it's going to miss us on this trip, but it does come over. We're skittish of that, as well as, is it transmitting a code? That paranoia was so great. When people heard about this, there were actually reports of people who went into their house and wouldn't come out for days because they were afraid that Sputnik actually had some sort of ray gun laser beam that was going to murder them if they went outside their houses. People were terrified because this had never happened before. And so there's terror. There's also amazement. There's some BBC clips of people saying, this is fantastic if we can do this. And they're speaking in the collective we as human beings. Because the space race had the ability to transcend the Cold War. What if we as humans can work together? But the fact is the United States is caught completely off guard. We who want to make sure that we're at the forefront, the Soviets have stolen a march on us. And they do it again in November when a Moscow stray, Laika, is put in a specially designed Sputnik 2 and becomes the first mammal shot into space to orbit the Earth. Such a cute puppy. There's just a problem, okay? People in the United States were terrified for whatever reason, and I've got, I can never find the news clip again, but for whatever reason, the American press called her Curly. I don't know why, but they did. There's fear. How can the Soviets do this? This is brute. Why are they testing on dogs? Come on, it's like my mother. She can love a movie, dog dies, that's it. She effing hates it, right? There is literally a site, and I saw this on Reddit the other day. There's actually a site you can go to ask, does the dog die in this movie? It's a cultural thing in the United States. We don't like dogs to die. But why this is so important, why Sputnik 2, November 3, 1957, is the Soviets have the capability to not only get rapidly successful space launches, okay, 2 back-to-back. Not only can they get satellites to orbit the Earth, they can put living things into orbit. Asterisk. I should say asterisk. We can put living things into orbit. We haven't figured out how to get them down yet. That takes time. But don't worry, animal friends out there, it's perfectly fine. Laika's okay. They put poisoned dog food that she was supposed to eat after 3 days, and it would euthanize her. For those of you awing in the audience, it gets worse. The Soviets know how to kill a puppy in space. The Soviets know how to, put dogs into space. They don't understand thermodynamics. The cooling system fails, and she literally roasts to death in about 3 hours. Kinda sucks. Give a second. Okay. How many of you are willing to admit that you went, oh, not the puppy? Here's the funny thing about human beings. Beginning of this course, we talked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We talked about 250,000 people dying in 2 nuclear attacks. And I guarantee none of you went, oh. But I guarantee at least a few people watching this video right now shed more than a few awes for Laika. The fact is, as Stalin would say, the death of 1 million is but a statistic. The death of 1 is a tragedy. The death of dog, well, that's just enough for a rage quit. So it's true. I like puppies. So what happens to us? What do we do? Well, simple. The United States has to rely on whatever programs it's got. Try to get some rocket up there quick because we have to show the world that we can do it. Enter the Navy's rocket system, Vanguard TV-3. And it's the most hilarious thing you're probably going to see today.
America's first
This is the Vanguard satellite. I don't even know what the hell it does, but it's tiny and it looks like it would hurt if you sat on it. But that's kind of most satellites. It's literally that stupid tiny as they put it into this rocket.
The scheduled launching of a 21-pound satellite in March. What happened is already unhappy history.
Why do the rockets have to be so big? Simple. To achieve orbit, you got to hit at least 22,000 miles an hour. That takes a pretty enormous 2 to 3 stage rocket. Lots of things can fail. And as we show this on live TV, nope. On live TV, the United States' first attempt at launching a satellite into orbit explodes. Okay, it just about a few feet off the launch pad comes down and then just detonates. And the crazy thing about Flopnik, okay, also called Stayputnik, Kaputnik, the press had a field day. This is December 6, 1957, okay. The only thing to survive of that rocket was that tiny little satellite. The little satellite that didn't do anything, that gets blown clear and survives. The rocket is a total loss. So what this shows is that the United States is way far behind. Communism has a strict advantage. You can concentrate everything. And so what that means is Sergei Korolev has everything at his disposal. Whereas, again, in our system, you've got the Navy doing its own thing. You've got the Air Force doing its thing. You've got the Army doing its thing. Nobody is working together, and you're not sharing or communicating ideas. It's going to take until January. Enter Wernher von Braun, this man right here, who, with his rockets, based on that German technology, are, much better and can send the Explorer satellite, into orbit. Now, don't be fooled. This part here is the satellite. This part on the left is the upper stage. This guy actually has a rocket engine up his armpit, which, hey, that's one way to get rid of pit hair, right? And so what we're going to see is this is the first successful American satellite. Now, it will be this that leads the Eisenhower administration to create NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We've got to, in October 58, we've got to create something to bring all of these plans together, bring in civilian stuff, and we've got to do this. Now, here's the thing. This works. This is actually called Vanguard 1. Never mind Vanguard TV3. Vanguard 1. The satellite is Explorer 1. And it's got some great stuff. It will discover the Van Allen radiation belt, which is absolutely hilarious because if you've got 2 hours to waste, it's on Netflix. Go watch the original Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Not the miniseries, or not the TV series, but the original movie. The plot of it is this. It comes out in the wake of having discovered the Van Allen radiation belt. We have no idea what it is. Okay, the idea that there's literally a belt of radiation surrounding Earth was kind of scary to people at the time. And so the thought was literally, well, what is it? What can happen? And so the premise of the movie, it's so stupid. A space storm, which doesn't exist, sets the Van Allen radiation belt on fire, and so it's up to a nuclear missile submarine to launch its nuclear missiles above the Earth's atmosphere, and the only way to put out the fire in space is to explode a bunch of nukes. It is completely freaking stupid. But what it shows is we're scared of this new stuff we're finding, and we're hoping that there might possibly be a good way to use nuclear weapons. Is it? Of course not. Can you set the Van Allen radiation belt on fire? If you can, I think it would have happened sometime in the past 4 billion years of Earth's existence. I think it would have happened. The Soviets are the clear winners. Okay, their rockets are exploding, sometimes at the same rate as ours do. But the issue is we're televising ours. We're televising the fact that from 57 to 59, in addition to Vanguard 1, we only get 2 more successes. There are 8 more failures. We are lagging behind. And so we have to keep redefining the race. Okay? Well, if it's not satellites, it's not exploration, we've got to redefine it somehow. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, what if we make it a manned race? Okay, what if we put a guy in space? That can be something. We've got to keep finding something that we can win at. And the thing that people don't realize in the early space race, communism is great for the short run, because communism can pull all the stuff and throw out a publicity stunt. And that's what Sergei Korolev is good at. But capitalism is better for the long haul, because we can invest in infrastructure. Are we going to get the first satellite into space? Hell no. Are we going to get the first guy into space? No. We're going to get the first guy in orbit? No. We're going to do the first spacewalk? No. But can we do the first docking? Yes. Can we do the first lunar orbit rendezvous? Yeah. Can we do the first moon landing? You betcha. Okay, the things that take nearly a decade to accomplish, we can do. Stuff in the short term, not so much. From an American perspective, and this should be something interesting considering the political climate we live in today, okay, one of my favorite stories, when I first took this job, I had to attend, I'm just a lecturer, unfortunately, because I got my PhD here at OSU, so I'm just a lecturer, I'm not tenure track, but, I don't mind. I love this job, and again, for you budding historians, one thing that, you're going to learn, you don't do this for the money. You do this because you literally can't do anything else. And in my case, anything else usually involves math, so I do this. But one of the things we're going to see is we have to deal with the issues of evolution. What do I mean? At this non-tenure track faculty meeting, we had to be told that if in our classes we ever taught evolution, we had to present creation-based alternatives for more religious students. Now, why I say that is I'm not mocking religious students, but still that idea that rather than go off science, we have to bring religion into it as well. And that's a reaction to the 1980s, the rise of the new right, the reintroduction of, religious-based stuff into the United States. In the 1950s, the effect of the space race was, never mind religion, put everything into sciences. We don't want science we don't want to explore space for science. No, that's not it. We need scientists to build better rockets. We need scientists to build better spacecraft. We need engineers. We need human computers, because that's how we're going to beat the Soviets. And it's rather interesting, 1957, okay, we want science and scientists out of our education system. And now 60 years later, if we're talking about a scientific concept that dates from 1859, that is as simple as if I have something that, if I have some trait that allows me to survive, say, I don't know, I'm fat, so I'm more likely to survive in cold weather, yay, nature's padding, I'm passing that trait on. So that's what survival of the fittest means. That's all it means, okay? But yet, because of the religious now implications that nobody even cared about, mind you, until the 1910s, after World War I, now instead of, hey, a drive for science, now we're kind of scared. We're kind of scared to accept science. We're kind of, again, 1950s, NASA was all the rage. What NASA said, people liked, people believed. Now we have bills in the Congress to get NASA to stop exploring Earth, which is one of its things, because they don't like the fact that NASA is saying, hey, yeah, guys, climate change, and it's human done. Well, we don't like that, so no. It's just an interesting thing. But stepping off my soapbox and getting to the 1960s, let's take each of the two early manned programs in turn. The Soviets, Vostok 1, and this is actually what will send Yuri Gagarin to space in April 1961. It, again, much like most early spacecraft, it looks like it would hurt if you sat on it. Most of these things, understand, they're small. Like, literally, imagine the room you're in, if you're in kind of just a bedroom or an office, a small office. That's more space than what you get. This is like a dorm room with a rocket at the back of it. I mean, that's pretty much what you're looking at. They're not built for comfort. They're not built really even for safety. They're built for a single purpose, to get you to space and back. Now, the Soviets begin in 1959. And what they do is, okay, how can we take some of our now satellites that we're making? How can we hollow one out and put a guy in it? How can we make this what they would call human-rated? Okay. At the same time, how can we use existing rockets? So that same R-7 Semyorka that they're using for Sputnik, how can we human-rate that? So, when rocket fires, it vibrates a lot, okay? At a certain vibration, that's going to kill you. And actually, to kind of help explain that, and if you're interested, I'm actually going to post one of my favorite documentaries about this early space race. I'm a space geek. The one thing I always wanted to do was to be an astronaut. But I couldn't fit in the space shuttle. That's fine. Space shuttle's retired, so Justin 1, Space Shuttle 0. But this stuff still fascinates me. Okay? And the fact that they made this work. I mean, we live in an era today, what? We test flew the Orion space capsule. And so I think it was, I want to say, 2 years ago now. And we're not projecting its first manned flight now for another 4 or 5 years. We take it slow. What the Soviets do in 59? Okay. Give us a spy satellite we can work with. Give us a nuclear missile launcher. Okay. And let's figure out how we can glue this stuff together and put a dude in it. We're going to select 20 of our best fighter pilots and train them to be cosmonauts. Okay. But not all of them were fighter pilots. Most were fighter pilots. Others were airmen. But a key concept of these early Vostok programs is their passengers. The entire thing is automated. They have no control. And in the good communist system, they are not going to balk at that. If Sergei Korolev and Nikita Khrushchev want an automated thing, outstanding. In 1960, we're going to get what's called Star City. And what this is where every Soviet launch, the whole Soviet space program, is going to be done. And that's still where they launch from to this day. Okay, everything is concentrated there. The American system, we don't want 20. Now, part of why the Soviets want 20, they're expecting failures. Okay, there's a joke in an old Soviet joke that there was a cosmonaut before Yuri Gagarin who went to space and he orbited the Earth. But his rocket failed, and his ship failed, and the oxygen supply ran out. And he was not loyal enough to hold his breath. Okay? The idea, they're expecting people to die. Whereas in the American system, with the Mercury 7, we're making these guys to be national heroes. And we're going to put them on TV. We're going to follow everything they do. We're going to have Life magazine tell you the story of their wives. And because of that, we've got to be damn some careful. We have to make sure that nothing happens to these guys. So we're going to do exquisite testing. Our tests actually begin the year earlier. We actually begin in 1958. And for us, we want only one thing: test and combat pilots. And that was specifically chosen by Dwight Eisenhower. People said, no, you can't work with test pilots. These guys are independent-minded. They're not going to take orders. And in fact, they're going to exert a lot of control in the space program, making sure that their wants and desires are, taken into account. For example, look at Vostok. The guy representing Gagarin, hands to his side. But the guy who I assume here is representing Alan Shepard, grabbing the control column, piloting his ship. There would not have been a school child in 1960, 1961, who didn't know these guys' names. Let me see if I can get all 7. Alan Shepard, John Glenn, who recently passed away last year, Gus Grissom, Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, Scott Carpenter. Okay, hey, I got them all outstanding. No, everybody would have known these guys. These guys were national heroes. And they're going to energize American industry because being a capitalist system, what you want to do is you want to go out, you want to get bids. You want to say, okay, who can build me the rocket the best and for the cheapest? Who can build me the spacecraft for the best and the cheapest? Again, to quote Alan Shepard, who, in May 1961, as he's preparing to go into orbit, and sometimes this quote's attributed to John Glenn, so one of the two said it, what went through your mind? And he said the fact that every part on this rocket was built by the lowest bidder. That's capitalism. But, again, in the long term, it's going to pay off. Now, what I want to do is, this is from Pathé News, this is from 1961, and it's just going to show the interview after, just a clip of the Mercury 7.
America's 7 Project Mercury astronauts are narrowed down to 3 finalists in the race for the honor and the risk of being the nation's first man in space. The Air Force, the Navy, and the Marines are represented.
Oh, I forgot Gordo
Field.
Cooper. I think I said Scott
The
Cooper.
date that one of
Twice.
them
Gordo
will
Cooper
first
was
be
the
sent
other
aloft is
one.
brought considerably
Who's from
closer
Oklahoma,
by
by
a
the way?
Mercury Atlas missile firing at Cape Canaveral that tests an unmanned capsule under the toughest conditions. The Atlas booster carries the capsule 107 miles above the Earth before it is plunged back to Earth at almost 13,000 miles an hour. It will undergo forces 16 and a half times greater than the pull of gravity and heat that would melt iron. The question is, if a man were inside that capsule, could he survive the flight?
Of course, here's the part that doesn't say. The Atlas has a problem. The Atlas likes to blow up. And so that's why we have to use the Redstone, because the fact is, they have the 3 finalists. Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, and John Glenn. But the Atlas keeps blowing up, so Shepard and Grissom have to use the Mercury Redstone. The thing where the parachute just went boop. That's what they've got to use. The fact is, and the Soviets have the same problem, but there's delays and problems. One of the most hilarious, and this is kind of a ding at capitalism, because you have one person making the booster and one person making the capsule. There's legit a case where the first Mercury capsule for its first test was 3 inches too big. It was literally 3 inches too big for the rocket because somebody got their specifications wrong. And I'm not even making this up. They had to bring out grinders and on each side just kind of shave off about, 3 inches to make the thing, I guess that'd just be 1.5 inches each side, actually fit. You can't make this up. How do we know human beings are going to make it into space? Well, a couple of things. We're going to do the space plane, such as the X-15. And the whole idea, we're going to get guys really, 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 really high. Not quite space high, but enough that, we can make sure that human beings aren't just going to and turn into, red goo. We're going to make sure that our bag of meat stays intact. That's us. We test on ourselves because we're good Americans. Soviets, welcome to the Soviet Space Dogs, where the Soviets are going to send pairs of puppies up routinely.
Полет до высоты 200 километров. Животные в герметической кабине полета. Слева собачка по кличке Пальма, справа отважная.
They're also going to sometimes send mice, but mostly they like to test puppies.
Невесомость. Перегрузка равна нулю.
And yeah, these are 2 dogs actually being launched into flight.
Раскрытие парашюта происходит на высоте 4
And in the case here, surviving. Why do I say in the case here? Numbers of Soviet dogs are going to die because their rockets still have about a 1 in 3 chance of blowing up on the launch pad. Boosters tend to fail. Sometimes chutes won't open. The fact is, the Soviets are doing this because they don't want to kill a cosmonaut, but at the same time, they're murdering puppies. But one of the most hilarious things to come out of this, again, because the Cold War is replete with this, are Strelka and Belka, the first 2 Soviet space dogs to come back alive. And it's kind of funny. Explorer 1 is the... Go back to Explorer 1 I'm talking about. It's still up there. We actually send it so far into space we don't mean to. It is still the oldest orbiting satellite ever. And it probably won't... Its orbit is not supposed to decay for another 200 years. Now, why I mention that is when they launched Belka and Strelka, they're actually launched at a higher plane. And supposedly, Sergei Korolev said, "Good communist dogs. We've just passed Explorer 1. Maybe they can piss on it." Again, Cold War, you can't make this up. When they come back, as a wonderful public relations FU, okay, one of them later got pregnant and had puppies, and Nikita Khrushchev sent one of the puppies to Kennedy. Or no, I guess it would still be Roosevelt. Or where the hell did Roosevelt come from? To Eisenhower. I'll get there eventually. Sends one to Eisenhower. Just kind of an FU. You guys can't get to space, but here's puppy of dog that's been in space. Again, how people think we're going to go to war when we're doing that, I don't know. But, that's the fear. Space is important. I mean, this is going to cost a lot of money. But it's important for propaganda. Again, this is how we can challenge the Soviet Union without risking nuclear war. We get funding. This again, why do we go to the moon? Because we're afraid of living under a red moon, so we're going to get funding. We're going to get all the money we want. The Soviets like this because if they can say that communism is the best, it helps them in the world stage. They need anything to say that, hey, we're better than the United States. Now, what we're going to see is once Yuri Gagarin makes it into space, okay, then we're going to see that one thing we're going to trumpet, and we're going to trumpet this with Alan Shepard. Well, he's the first free man into space. Or this is for the free world. Again, we're going to cast that free and slave. And we're going to see that this, the space race is going to do something unparalleled in human history. We're literally going to go from, in 1957, the first satellite, which is a giant metal basketball with a ham radio, to 12 years later, we're going to land people on the moon and get them back. In 12 years. Think about that. 12 years, that's a long time. I mean, that's a fairly short time. And this, again, had never been done. Okay, all of this, they're having to think up on the fly. But because of the propaganda aspect, because it's so vital to winning the Cold War, that's how it happens. The Soviets are going to play this up, the idea of peace and Mother Russia. Or here, the Vostok, as they chronicle each of the 4 Vostok flights. As, this is glory to the worker. Whereas American, popular science, let's talk about, this, or let's make a race for the moon. Okay? We can do this. But then, April the 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin stuns the world. Yuri Gagarin climbs into Vostok 1. And he will do something that, people didn't think he was going to get back. The rocket he was in had a legit 50% success rate. Okay? I'd like to show that, but that's 10 minutes. So that'll be in the documentary I want to show. He records a message, and so do many astronauts. That way, if one failed, they could just pop in the next guy. He climbs in to Vostok 1, again, the launcher being a repurposed nuclear missile, and becomes the first human being in history to journey on a mission, not just to go into space, but to orbit the Earth. The Soviets had intended from the very beginning, this is to orbit the Earth. And Gagarin is successful. Okay. Now, again, this shows how inadequate the American space program is. And why is it inadequate? The fact is, we could have launched in time. But in January 31, we had, we launched this man, a chimp by the name of Ham. And the rocket had problems. Now, Ham survives, but because it was so bad, okay, Wernher von Braun demanded another test flight. He did not want to risk Alan Shepard being launched and being killed in America's first mission. So because you've got to have another launch, again, it takes time to build this stuff, because another launch, that means that the United States can't go to May. And so again, the Soviets win. There are going to be 6 Vostok flights, and each one is record-breaking. Okay, each time what they're going to do something different. It's not just a case of we're launching, but what is it? I think is it the 3rd or the 4th? Or no, the 3rd. They're going to have somebody be up there for a full day. Or they're going to launch a woman, Valentina Tereshkova. And again, and I'm not being sexist, that was a publicity stunt. And the reason why? She was not a fully trained cosmonaut. She literally fell asleep and didn't do 3/4 of her experiments. But it was just for the Soviets to prove, hey, we're better than the United States. The Soviets get so much out of Vostok 1, again, including orbit the Earth, it'll take us a year to catch up. It takes us a year before we can orbit the Earth. But nonetheless, we're gonna claw back as best we can. Okay, we're running behind, but we're going to do it. Okay. May the 5th, 1961, Alan Shepard climbs into Freedom 7, becomes, as we will say, the first free man into space. And it doesn't come with a more American story. So Shepard loved the coffee. He liked to drink a lot of coffee. This is a 15-minute suborbital flight. That's all we can do. It's just going to go up into space and about 300 miles downrange. He climbs in after, several cups of coffee, and there's a delay. And there's a delay. And there's a delay and a delay, and for hours and hours. What happens if you drink a lot of coffee and you're stuck somewhere for hours? He has to go potty. Well, they don't want to pull him out of the capsule because that'll be more delays. So the first American astronaut literally has to ask permission to pee himself in the spacesuit because you gotta go. And so the first American in space literally goes to space with wet boxers on. He lives. 5 minutes in space. That's it. Okay. After him, it'll be Virgil Grissom. Okay. Again, Gus Grissom. His first name was Virgil. He didn't like he wanted to be Gus. They tried to say, well, what's your middle name? Let's call you by that. Ivan. Ivan slang for Russian. Can't do that. So Shepard, launches into space.
Mercury Redstone rocket was fueled once
then
again.
Grissom launches into space.
Had come to an end,
and Grissom has kind of special significance. Grissom will be a Mercury astronaut. He'll take up the first Gemini project, and he will be killed in Apollo 1 in 1967, becoming, an American hero.
Everyone at Cape Canaveral knew that the safety margin was terribly small. The blast-off was perfect.
How about you? You'd think they would want to go just a little bit faster, just saying. Again, these are flimsy. These are also converted nuclear missiles. But, it's all we have available. John Glenn, Friendship 7, February the 20th, 1962. So that's actually, 3 days from now, becomes the first American to orbit the Earth. Okay? But it takes time. It takes time to make this happen. We are perpetually losing. And that is one thing the United States cannot afford to do. So how are we going to beat this? Enter John F. Kennedy. Enter John F. Kennedy, May the 25th, 1961. Literally, this is 20 days after Shepard's flight. And he starts talking about a moon race. And then, at Rice University the next year, after Glenn has proven that we can orbit, he puts it at his very best.
William Bradford, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulty, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead. Whether we join in it or not, we mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
One we intend to win. That's exactly what's going to happen. The fact is, Kennedy realized that, okay, communism has the advantage in the short term, but in the long term, that's how we can beat them. He calls, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. The whole point is we have to go to the moon by December the 31st, 1969. That's how we can win the space race. Now, that might have just gone down as just a speech. That might have gone down as just something, hey, it's a campaign promise. But then 1963, John F. Kennedy will be assassinated. And what that then does is Kennedy, believe it or not, is not nearly as popular president as everyone thought. But he attains almost some sort of martyrdom with his assassination, and so much is done in his honor. Civil rights, voting rights, the space race in his honor. This becomes, well, that's Kennedy's dream. We have to honor the dream of a fallen American president. And now space, science, no, that's secondary. Now it's a moon race. Now the United States wants to get to the moon. And he said that is a challenge we are willing to accept. And with that, I think that should wrap it up for today. Sorry, it went a few minutes over. But again, I love the space race. I think it's so cool. So I'll go ahead and post that documentary. You don't have, I mean, I hate being the teacher says you don't have to watch it, but I think you'll find it interesting, especially if you find this as cool as I do. So I think that'll be it for now. We've got one more lecture in this unit. I'll post it during exam week. I'll try to have it done so it'll drop Monday. That way you can watch it, maybe even listen to it as you're writing, working on the exam. But with that, I want to take us through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because now with the seeming perfection of missiles, to the point that technology can get us to space, now then we have to address that if they can get us to space, it can also take us to nuclear Armageddon. And with that, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.